Let me introduce the second speaker, and that's Amy from Linx Printing Technologies, and her poster is on from Washcoat Formulations to Linx. And once again, I encourage everyone to ask questions if you have any for Amy, please. Amy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vivek. So I'm Amy. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of my experiences so far. So I did an MChem in chemistry at the University of York, and this was with a year in industry in pharmaceuticals at Hoffmann La Roche in Switzerland. Nothing to do with formulation at all, or to do with drug development. I then did a PhD, and that's again back at the University of York, also nothing to do with formulation, but instead was focused on catalysis. So I did a lot of designing and synthesizing iridium carbene catalysts, and a lot of looking at reactions with hydrogen for hydrogenation, and studying them by NMR, and a bit of what Omar's already spoken about, looking at NMR and relaxation. So again, nothing formulation related. And when I'd finished my PhD, I joined Johnson Matthey in their clean air division, which was at the time emission control technologies. And this quite nicely links to Dan's mention of substrates for catalytic converters. So we worked with Corning, a company he'd previously experienced, and I made Washcoat formulations. So a catalytic converter, in this little diagram in the middle of the screen, converts poisonous gases from your exhaust stream coming out of the back of a combustion engine into a lot less harmful gases to be released from your exhaust. Now, the honeycomb structure itself doesn't do anything unless you coat it with an active formulation, and the active formulations in the industry is called a washcoat. Now, there's a few key requirements of the washcoat. It's essentially like a paint. We have to paint every single channel in our honeycomb substrate with this washcoat. And the key things we had to focus on were adhesion. It's got to stick to the substrate. You don't want it coming off and spitting out the back of your exhaust. We had to focus quite a lot on viscosity, typically viscosity like a paint, because we're essentially painting it onto a ceramic. Particle size of the particles in our washcoat. So washcoats are dispersions of various materials in solvent, and particle size can be very important for activity. Then other key things to focus on was surface area. So the bigger the surface area, the more areas available to do the catalysis, converting the gases. And pH is something to focus on for stability of our washcoat formulations. And once we had these key requirements, we've got to focus on the formulation itself and what goes into it. So I've already mentioned solvent. It's water, water-based formulations. We've got to have some kind of active metal to be able to do the catalysis. And these are typically precious metals, platinum, palladium. These have to be bound to some kind of support material, commonly a silica alumina type material that has to be well suspended in our solvent. Might be other materials in there, promoters, storage materials, and then additives are a key area that we focused on. Rheology modifiers, dispersants, so we've got to disperse our support materials completely homogeneously so that we can maximize the amount of material available for reaction. Binders and defoamers. So unlike Omar, who wanted foam, we did not want foam. So we had to control that through the use of additives. And I was responsible for production support for our Asia manufacturing sites in China, India, and Malaysia, and did a lot of plant trials, looking at stability of the washcoats on much larger scale, up to 2,000 kilos, monitoring these particular properties during batching and stirring and seeing the effect over time. If the washcoats themselves were not stable, then the manufacturing plant could not cope with them particularly well. It's easy when you're batching 1 kilogram and you can make it in a couple of hours and produce your catalytic converter. But in a manufacturing site, they're making potentially hundreds of 2,000 kilogram batches every day, and the management therefore cannot be quite so fast. So it's got to be stable over time. And there's also then linked to that a lot of problem solving to go on. And then I moved, still with formulation, but no catalysis, across to Linx, looking at continuous inkjet printing. So looking at the design and formulation of new inks. So printing relies on droplets. We have to charge the droplets of ink and deflect these to print onto a substrate. This is for things such as batch numbers and date stamps on food, for example. And again, a lot of requirements, some very similar to Washcoat. Adhesion again, colour, because it's an ink. Companies will often want a colour. And conductivity is key because we have to charge the ink. And so within the formulations, again, an awful lot of materials, as we previously discussed in the talks, they all interact and they all bring a key property to our ink formulation. And looking forward, again, making greener inks, and again, meeting legislation. So I've got a lot of focus on UK REACH regulation, evaluation and authorization of chemicals, and how we use those within companies, and looking at making formulations that are not containing particularly harmful chemicals. So thank you for listening. And are there any questions?
Thank you, Amy. Slightly different, but that's exactly what we like. Obviously, this also tells and it conveys the message how varied formulation science can be, but the basic fundamentals can be applied pretty much anywhere in any field.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions. So if I can. Chris asks: is in washcoats when you use rheology modifiers, what kind of rheology are you actually trying to obtain?
So our washcoat is like a paint. So we, like you would paint on your wall, we'd want that kind of rheology. Often the formulation as it is without a rheology modifier is far too thin, too runny, and it can just drip off where we've painted it. So it needs to be like a paint on the wall.
I guess just a follow-on question to that, it's how do you actually coat these catalytic converters? I mean, is it some sort of dip coating? Do you just dip them in the solution and pull them out like you would do? Everything comes in my mind is stents, or would you just do? Is there some sort of spray coating? How do you coat them? So
that is one method, a dip type process.
Yeah.
There is also a spraying approach, and putting it in on the top rather than dipping on the bottom. Right.
Okay. Thank you. So with such a Phil asks, with such a varied career, what would you say has been your most important transferable skill for success?
Ooh, what a question. Being able to, because they're quite different on paper, my experiences, you've got to think a bit outside the box and not think, oh, right, I'm focusing on this, I'm focusing on these things, they don't apply anywhere else. Because actually, unlike the others have said, if you think too niche, you get a bit tied in one kind of area. But actually formulation is much wider. And although I only joined Linx late last year, So I've just completed 6 months with them. And actually at the start, you're thinking, oh gosh, I've not done anything. I had no experience of ink development at all. But actually, my previous experience, things do all relate. So it's thinking a bit less tied to one project or one formulation work and thinking a bit wider. Actually, it's all the same, all very similar.
I totally agree. Thank you, Amy.